question. The member from Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Again to the Premier. Hope springs eternal. One government official said this about the Liberals' determination to make people pay an extra $4 billion on their hydro bills. Quote, hopefully they'll come to the conclusion that the plan can be financed by the province rather than externally, as that would be a lot simpler and cheaper. Why would the Premier ignore the advice of non-partisan public servants and push ahead with this financial cover-up?
The member will withdraw.
Withdraw.
Premier.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy to rise and once again talk about the importance of the policy choice that we made, Mr. Speaker. That policy choice was to ensure that we can have that clean, reliable and affordable system that we've talked about. And I know, Mr. Speaker, that we keep talking about the importance of making sure that we keep electricity costs within the electricity system. And the Fair Hydro Plan does that, Mr. Speaker. We have always ensured that when OPG builds a new hydroelectric dam, when Bruce Power refurbs its nuke plants, Mr. Speaker, when we see Guelph Hydro, for example, or any utility actually invest in their system, the cost of borrowing stays within the electricity system. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we brought forward this policy choice, was to keep the cost of the electricity system in that sector, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Just note, her predecessor...
Supplementary.
Thank you. Her predecessor decided he didn't have to answer to the legislature either, and that didn't end well.
Yeah.
Speaker, the AG's report says that senior government officials and staff cautioned against that expensive accounting trick. She said officials noted the design of their $40 billion borrowing scheme, quote, will result in higher costs for Ontarians, end quote. This was cut and dry. The Liberals were told if they proceeded with the trick, it would cost people more, and they did it anyway. Wow. Why is the Premier putting her desperate re-election hopes ahead of the needs of Ontario's families?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From my understanding, the Premier's previous predecessor, when he left, we ended up winning a majority government on this side of the House because we were the party that brought forward a plan that actually benefited all of the people of Ontario, Mr. Speaker. None of them on that side, Mr. Speaker, had a plan.
Finish, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition parties had no plan then. They have no plan now, Mr. Speaker. We brought forward a plan that brought immediate relief, a policy choice that we made, Mr. Speaker, a policy choice that we made to continue to ensure that we have a clean, reliable and affordable system of electricity in this province, Mr. Speaker, and something that we'll continue to do for the people of Ontario.
Final supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker, and again to the Premier. The Premier's $40 billion hydro borrowing scheme was already going to drive up hydro bills in the long run. To hide the cost, she or someone in her cabinet authorized a $4 billion accounting trick and added it onto people's hydro bills. The AG says the Liberals were warned about this, they were given other options, and they simply ignored the advice from civil servants and went ahead anyway. The Premier won't tell us who green-lit this massive betrayal of the public trust. She refuses to release emails that show who in her party knew what and when. How many more desperate abuses of power does this Premier plan before the next election?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's unequivocally untrue, Mr. Speaker. We have always been open and transparent as a government. We'll continue to cooperate, Mr. Speaker, with the Office of the Auditor General. And of course, Mr. Speaker, let me reiterate something.
Finish, please, Mr.
Like I started off with, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about what we have done so far. 13,212 emails that have been provided to the Auditor General, 1,200 emails and records from the ISO, hundreds from the OPG Authority, OPG, Mr. Speaker, 3,242 from the Ontario Financing Authority, thousands of records from the Treasury Board, Mr. Speaker. In this process, Mr. Speaker, we have ensured that every day and throughout our operations, we're adhering to all document retention standards.